Live presentation of the Joy Touch technique, Free Soul's discovery that we call learning to access your brain's joy center. I have been teaching in mind-body fields professionally since 1970, 25 years now. And I can honestly tell you that I feel this technique you're going to learn tonight is the most important of the discoveries I've made in that entire 25 years. This technique has changed my life in how I deal with everything. It doesn't make your problems go away. It doesn't make your difficulties just vanish, but it helps you be better through them. It helps you use your physiology for yourself instead of against yourself. Most people are not aware that there are actually parts of the brain that create the vast majority of your unhappiness. One of the reasons this area hasn't been explored more is when we don't feel happy or we don't feel as peaceful or as positive as we think we should, we tend to blame ourselves. We say, oh, it's my fault. If I were really more spiritual or if I were practicing, what I preach. There's nothing wrong with wanting to do better. But it is worthless to guilt yourself and beat up on yourself when what's happening is a physiological reflex. You wouldn't say you're a lousy person because you had hay fever and someone blew pollen by you. It's just that triggered you. This area that we're going to be talking about affects an even wider part of the society than hay fever because it affects everybody. Everybody is literally walking around with this black hole of the brain inside of their head. Illustration number 1 shows the limbic system of the brain. This is the part of the brain that creates the vast majority of your unhappinesses, your angers, your worries, your hurts, your fears. Yes, there are things in life that trigger this, but once it gets going, it's literally like a broken record car alarm that just keeps dragging you down into the worst of your dinosaur animal past. What you're going to learn today is literally a way to start living differently for the rest of your life. These things that I've written on the board, to be able to lower your blood pressure in 2 to 3 minutes, to literally drain stress out of your body, to feel better fast without needing alcohol, nicotine, drugs, or overeating. A lot of people say, well, I don't drink, or I don't smoke, I don't do drugs. But they do pizza and chocolate like crazy. Okay? And we all know that we don't need those side effects like at the hips and the waist either. Okay? You're going to learn how to clear any anger, worry, hurt, or fear. And we're also going to show you how to tap the full power of peacefulness of the soul dimensions that even science says you exist in. All of these things you're going to learn in this next 90 minutes. You're going to walk out of here knowing these skills and being able to be more in command of the stresses in your life. Now, learning to trigger the brain's joy center, what we call the Joy Touch technique, is a biofeedback technique. So the first thing we have to do is show you how to get rid of stress. Stress creates static that fuzzes all biofeedback and mind-body healing abilities. Do you know what it's like when you drive with your AM radio on under high power lines? How it totally destroys the signal? That's what happens when you're stressed out. You literally have that kind of static in your nervous system. So we got to deal with that first. Fortunately, the scientific community now fully agrees that there are ways that the mind can trigger the body's stress reduction mechanisms. The key person to pioneer that field was Dr. Herbert Benson at Harvard Medical School. He discovered what they call the relaxation response. You've all heard about the adrenaline reflex, the fight or flight reflex. The relaxation reflex is like the corollary of that, the opposite. It's the way the body can literally trigger a reflex that helps all of your metabolic and physiological functions aid in your unwinding. When the relaxation reflex is triggered, your heart rate stabilizes, your blood pressure drops, even the metabolic level in your cells goes more into a cruise and unwind mode. Yogis in India have known about that effect for thousands of years. Dr. Benson is the one who proved it to the West's satisfaction. And basically, he teaches people a 30-minute meditation for how to trigger that reflex. And the only problem I have on that is that most people don't have 30 minutes. Okay? So what I found is a way to trigger that reflex in 2 to 3 minutes. And the key is through breathing. Most people, though, when they try to relax with breathing, actually go too far. They do the wrong thing by breathing too deeply. Have you ever tried yoga breathing? 1 breath a minute, you know. And then you kind of wait and you count. It's hard work, isn't it? In fact, if you were hooked up to a blood pressure cuff, when you do that type of 1 breath a minute, your heart rate and blood pressure actually go up until you develop the lung capacity for, for that type of breathing. The key to draining stress in minutes is to learn your personal relaxation breath pattern. Each of you has a rate of breathing that your body associates with that relaxation reflex. It's different for each one of you based on your height, your weight, your lung capacity, but the way you find it is identical. What you do is you gradually slow and deepen your breaths until you get to a point where you don't want to go any slower or any deeper, where to go a little bit slower or deeper would feel uncomfortable, like you were forcing. That's where you stop and cruise. That is the rate that your body will associate with triggering that relaxation reflex. Okay? Now, I'm going to lead you in finding that breath pattern. And, some of you got here early, you've been here for a while, you may feel relaxed. Take a moment before we start to just see how you feel in your chest, your arms, your blood pressure, your shoulders, wherever you hold your tension. And then compare it to how you feel in a few short minutes. Okay? People ask me, do I breathe with my eyes open or closed? It's up to you. I generally recommend closing your eyes so you cut out one whole level of distraction, but you have the freedom to do it however you wish. Okay? Go ahead and take a deep breath and just blow it out, and keep your eyes open if you like, or not, just close them and just start to sense the rate of breathing you're at right now. Just kind of become aware of the depth and rate that you're breathing at this moment, and then gradually start to take slower and deeper breaths. Moving down to your own personal relaxation breath pattern. Gradually take slower and deeper breaths, moving down to that rate that's going to feel just right for you, where to breathe even a little slower or a little deeper would feel like an effort or a push. Taking slower and deeper breaths, getting down to that rate that feels just right to cruise at. And as you reach that rate, where you don't want to go any slower or deeper, just cruise there, and with each inhalation, feel yourself breathing in calmness. With each inhalation, feel yourself breathing in relaxation. With each exhalation, feel yourself breathing out any tension from the day. With each exhalation, just releasing the debris of stress. Breathe in calmness, and just breathe out the debris. And go ahead and take 1 or 2 more focused breaths like that. And when you feel comfortable, just gently open your eyes and see how you feel in your chest, in your arms, in your shoulders. Okay. Now, real quick before you do anything, Picture if you were going to describe to someone at home this relaxation breath pattern, how would you describe it to them? How would you describe to them how it felt at what point you stopped at? You're really not doing this for them. This is for your own mind, so that you know how to get back to that exact right point yourself. How did it feel when you chose not to breathe any deeper or slower? How would you describe that to someone else? Do you know when to stop? Okay. All right? By the way, how did that feel? Did that feel good? Do you realize you did the whole thing in under 3 minutes? Imagine how much better it feels if you take 5. When you really learn that relaxation breath pattern, you can trigger the relaxation reflex not in 20 to 30 minutes, in 20 to 30 seconds. And you don't have to be sitting down. Let's say you're running late to something. You're already going to be late. You can either arrive late and stressed or late and calm. You understand? Have you ever done that thing where you're driving on the freeways and we kind of subconsciously think if we grip the steering wheel tighter, the cars will move faster? Instead of doing that, just kick into that pattern. The Joy Touch technique I'm going to show you in a moment will help with that also, but if you kick into that breath rate, you literally send subconscious signals to your whole body not to let the external tension run you. Okay? All right. Now, this is a precursor for doing the Joy Touch or anything you want to do. If you can kick into that relaxation breath pattern, you can get the body more prepared for triggering its mood elevation mechanisms. The brain has mood elevation mechanisms. I mean, you've all heard about endorphins, but you don't have to run a marathon to trigger endorphins. You understand? I could drive around Los Angeles. I could drive around this city for 26 miles looking for some shop, and I might find it. If I had the address, I could go right there. And that's what you're going to learn today with how to trigger the septum pellucidum area of the brain. Before I get to that, I just want to give you some background as to why more hasn't been done with this. I was actually guilty for about 6 months after I discovered this that I missed it for 20 years. I've kind of rationalized that off to, when I came out of MIT as an honors graduate accepted to Harvard Med School, I didn't have a lot of emotional stresses. I was more interested in the powers of the mind and unlimited mental potentials. And then 20 years later, I had a mortgage, 2 kids, and a national organization, and a lot more mental stresses. And I literally discovered this for my own survival. Okay? After I got over my own guilt, I was furious with the establishment that medicine hadn't discovered this decades ago. The mood elevation centers in the brain have been known about for decades. And I was kind of ranting about that at one lecture in Denver, and a doctor who was right there in the audience said, "Oh, of course they haven't done more with it." And I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "There's no money in it. You teach people how to do this for themselves. They don't have to buy your light beer, your Virginia Slims, your Prozac. Do you realize that there are over 1 million prescriptions a month being written in the United States for Prozac? And the vast majority of them are being written by non-mental health professionals? And what most people don't know is that Prozac only works for about 70% of the people who take it. And even for the people it works for, it takes somewhere between 1 to 3 weeks to work at $1 a pill. Tell me anything else in your life you'd wait 3 weeks to work. If a plumber came and said, "I think I fixed the toilet, but try it for 3 weeks, and if it keeps overflowing, I'll come back, we'll try something else," you wouldn't put up with that. Okay? Now, to not just make bad guys out of the whole medical establishment, I mean, obviously, most of my contemporaries have been trained since birth to think of throw a chemical at it or stick an electrode someplace. I feel fortunate that since before I went to MIT, I was exploring mind-body. So there aren't as many people with my background of brain science and also 25 years expertise in teaching mind-body techniques. But even if they did try earlier to stimulate the brain's mood elevation mechanisms, The reason it probably never succeeded was, I'll bet it's because they went after the wrong area of the brain. The right area of the brain by their thinking. See, I'm going to teach you how to trigger the septum pellucidum area of the brain. If you talk to a neurologist or a straight brain scientist, they're going to tell you that the major mood elevation center in the brain is the hypothalamus. But the hypothalamus is buried right down in the middle of this black hole of the brain, the limbic system. It's literally in a neurological minefield. There are areas surrounding the hypothalamus that, if stimulated, create fits of rage or severe depression or anxiety. The classic story is of a World War I soldier who was shot in the head and the fragment lodged in the ventricles, and he had to be hospitalized for the rest of his life. They didn't have the technology back then to take it out. But the reason was because whenever he would move too rapidly, the fragment would slide in the ventricle and scrape different parts of the limbic system of the brain. So he'd be perfectly fine 1 minute and move too rapidly and hit one of the depressive centers, and he'd just start crying uncontrollably. Or if he stimulated the amygdala or some of the rage areas, he would literally become violent, which was the main reason he had to be institutionalized. Okay? Yes, the most powerful parts of the brain for mood elevation are in the hypothalamus, but it's like trying to hit a minuscule bullseye in a target from 100 yards with so many other adversive centers around that if anybody did try in the past, I've never read about it, to trigger the hypothalamus with mind-body, they probably gave up because they probably got a canceling out effect if they hit those negative areas, or maybe even a negative effect where people felt worse, so they gave up. The septum pellucidum is a breakthrough discovery because it literally can trigger the hypothalamus by remote. There are cells in the front of the septum pellucidum that have direct neurosynaptic connections to the part of the hypothalamus that opium affects. And don't let me scare you by saying that. People say, oh, opium, is that a heavy... You know, you've all heard of endorphins. Endorphins are called the brain's natural opiates. They're the same class of chemical. The problem with opium is since it's made by a plant, not a human body, it doesn't match with human physiology naturally. And it stays stuck in the receptor sites. Doesn't clear. That's what creates the addictive pattern, you see. So by being able to trigger that part of the hypothalamus without bouncing around in the minefield, you have a way of stimulating the brain's mood elevation mechanisms that is much cleaner, much neater, and actually also easier to describe. Now, in the first illustration, that is the brain with the eyeballs, okay, you can see the limbic system of the brain is this darker lower loop, okay? And right above the mammillary bodies, right in the middle of that darker lower loop is a round node that's the hypothalamus. Can you see how the septum pellucidum sits above the limbic system? It's almost perched like a fire extinguisher. Literally, it can put out that raging inferno of an anger, worry, hurt, or fear. There's not as much known about the septum pellucidum, but here's what is known. First of all, its very location alone should give you a hint of how vital it is. It is the only part of the brain that is surrounded on three sides by ventricles, the fluid-filled cavities that provide the brain's natural shock absorber, and the roof of it is the corpus callosum, the huge bundle of fibers that connects right and left brain. Okay? It is primarily a fluid-filled cavity, but those cells at the front of it have that connection that I talked about. We have known for decades that if that septal area gets damaged, people develop a condition called anhedonia, which is the big psychiatric term for inability to experience pleasure of any kind. Does that give you an idea of the vitalness of this area? People say to me, well, what kind of lab experiments have been done with that? Not a lot, because, this is one area where brain science and brain research is going to lag. People are really not willing to let you stick an electrode in their head. At $7 a day experimenters pay, they tend to not let you, we don't know what will kill going in, but if we get the right spot, it'll feel good. So until we refine the technology, okay, or until we get much more articulate lab rats, who can say, oh yeah, baby, that's good, right to the left. The lab brain research is going to lag on this, okay? Here's what is known. Dr. Robert Heath of Tulane University, and by the way, most of the electrode lab type studies that have been done have obviously been done on cases that are so severe that putting an electrode is minor compared to what's going on. Dr. Heath, with people who were catatonically depressed, in other words, so depressed they literally were in catatonia, weren't eating, in danger of dying from the catatonia. When he electrically stimulated the septum pellucidum area, not only did the people come out of the catatonia, they felt euphoric. Terminal cancer patients maxed out on morphine but still had pain. In other words, receiving the maximum non-lethal dose of morphine that they were allowed to give them, and they still were in agony. Put an electrode wherever you want, just let me die in peace. When they had the septum pellucidum area stimulated electrically, felt pain relief, okay? And I can also tell you that we just recently, in May of 1995, completed a pilot study at Northern Arizona University where we tracked people over 5 weeks with very extensive stress evaluation charts. And it's a pilot study that's not fully statistically significant because only about 40 people completed the study, and you need a larger group to have complete statistical significance. But all of the trends were positive. The people who learned the septum pellucidum technique had lower stress levels for the entire 5 weeks than the control group that was taught nothing. And we also took a third group and kind of tricked them. We told them to try mentally caressing the occipital lobes at the back of the head. This was during winter, you see. And we told them that if they mentally stimulated the occipital lobes, they would be able to trick the brain into thinking it was getting more light and not being as affected by seasonal depressive disorders, seasonal affective disorder. We went after the occipital lobe because we felt we would also get them to trigger some of the brain stem and limbic areas at the back, the amygdala, which is a rage area, and that's what we found. That group actually had higher stress levels than the control group for the vast majority of the study. So that gives you some of the background. All that is inconsequential to you because you're going to experience this. The minute you learn this technique, you're going to be able to feel how you can give yourself that mood elevation boost whenever you want. The other thing that's nice about the septum pellucidum, it's much easier to describe how to find it than the hypothalamus. 2 out of the 3 ways you'd measure in the head, it's in the exact middle. Measuring from side to side, you just think exact middle. Measuring from front to back, you just think exact middle. Okay? So all you have to know is, where is it up and down? And that's what the second illustration helps you with. The one that shows the outline of the head. You can see it has the indent for the eye socket, and then an indent up here for the hairline. And if you use those as a guide, you'll see that the septum pellucidum is at about mid-forehead level. Now, anytime we're working with locating where the septum pellucidum is for you, you always would prefer to err being too high than being too low. Because if you go in too low, what do you hit? You hit the limbic system of the brain. If you want to get irritable, if you want to give yourself PMS and have a fight with somebody, just go in at eye level. Okay?
What are you talking about? Going in?
I'm going to get to what I mean by going in.
So think of it as being at the third eye?
The question is it at the third eye level? It's in that same level, but a different orientation. People who've done a lot of visualization, who visualize through the mind's eye of the third eye, what they do is they go up to that level and they focus outward. What you're going to be doing is going up to that level and focusing inward. Have you ever seen what people do when they get really stressed? How they rub this area? How they rub their forehead? If they're literally trying to get their hands through the bony plate of the skull to massage that area. Well, the fingers won't go, but your mind can. Okay? And what we're going to do is a series of exercises to help you be able to do that more and more effectively. Now, the first thing I want to do is a couple of warm-up exercises to help you locate the area. Okay? What we're going to do, Richard, would you come up here and help me for a minute? We're going to have you get a partner. You do not have to do the partner-assisted techniques. But I've found that when people can do the partner warm-ups, they get it better by the end. So I would encourage doing that. If you're pausing and getting a partner, we're going to expect you to feel anything. I want you to just kind of practice how to locate where that spot would be. And what your partner's going to do is they're going to do a very simple touch technique that will help you kind of think of where that spot would be in your head. See, it's about mid-forehead and center of the head. So there's two ways you can do this, and I'd like you to try both with your partner. What you can do is touch them with two fingers, one at the mid-forehead and one in the middle on the side. So it's kind of like you're asking them to connect the dots. Now, watch me on this first. We'll pause and let everybody do this with a partner. But what I would do is say, just connect these two touches inside your head, forehead and side. Or you can touch forehead and top middle. It doesn't seem to work to try and touch all three. It seems to be too distracting. But you can say, which do you like better? Do you like locating this way or locating this way? And some people actually like just touching forehead, top, like that.
Could you do it to yourself?
Okay. Now, as I said, this is just a warm-up exercise to help you be able to identify where that spot is in your own head. You're not supposed to have felt anything yet. Okay? Our next warm-up exercise, you may feel something. But remember, we're going to do 4 or 5 exercises and the effect builds. This next exercise, you'll be working with a partner, assisted triggering of the center. And one of you will stand. Richard is standing here so everyone can see, but the partner that's experiencing this would be seated. You stand on whatever side of them is most comfortable, whether you're right or left-handed. But what you do is you take 1 or 2 fingers, go ahead and take your glasses off, and you put them right on the bridge of their nose, between the bridge and the tip of their nose. Now, here is what this partner-assisted warm-up technique is all about. We tend to be very eye-level focused. You understand? The biggest challenge is to get you above eye level before you go in. If you don't get above eye level before you go in, you're just going to hit the irritational centers. Okay? So, what your partner does is with 1 or 2 fingers, they gently bring their hand up the forehead. They're stroking upward, touching as lightly as you can, and then just as you get to that mid-forehead, you press lightly. I'm going to be leading us all together, and I'm actually going to give 4 commands. What I'm going to say is, come up, touch, go in, caress. Come up, touch, go in, caress. The first 2 commands are for the partner who is stroking. Come up, we all bring our hands up together. On the touch, you touch lightly at that mid-forehead region. The second 2 commands are for the person in the chair. Go in and caress. Now, what do I mean by caress? There are many different visualizations and approaches that you can take to this technique. The only thing that doesn't work is trying to stab a button. Okay? If you do that, you're going to tighten right down, and you're going to get into tense and voluntary nervous system, muscle tightness, and out of mind-body mode. So whatever visualization helps you focus on that area without forcing will work for you. here are some of the different ones that people have tried. When I say caress, it's because for many people, they picture literally going in and like stroking the fur of a pet in that area. Okay? That you literally brush by. Remember I said those cells at the front of the septum pellucidum? It's almost like you're strumming them, like strumming a harp for many people. See, the way nerves work is when they're triggered, they send a pulse. And nerves work in pulses. And that's why we'll be doing this technique in waves. I'll be saying, come up, touch, go in, caress. And then we'll do it again. Come up, touch, go in, caress. You know, when you're waiting, the stroking partner brings their hand back ready to go again. I've had some people literally use that wave analogy. They picture waves washing up on the shores of that area, or a flow of warm air flowing right through that area and triggering it, or energy flowing through it. I've had some people that say they don't so much flow through as around it. They go there and around. Okay? Sometimes I literally picture it as playing the harp. When my kids are driving me nuts, I'm playing a symphony up there. Okay? This warm-up section is for practicing different approaches and whether a little right, little left, little upper, little lower, what feels best for you. Okay? But don't over-try because we're going to do 3 or 4 different exercises where it gets better and better. Now, what should you feel if you hit that area? At first, what you feel is very subtle. It's been described as like an inner ah, just kind of a feel, or an inner smile. I've had some people say it feels like a mellow energizer. This is actually better than drugs because people feel mellow but still very focused, as opposed to blobbed out. I've had other people say, wow, I just felt like all the weight lifted off my shoulders. Some people feel a chills or a tingling. But at first, usually what it is just kind of a smoother feeling. And for some of you, you'll actually feel it stronger when you leave here. If you remember to do this when you're stuck in traffic and you feel that tight and you caress there and it's like, oh, who cares? Okay? Now, let me identify one other thing real quick before we go on. So I know we have many different types of learners here, okay? Let me see the hands of all the people who learned to write in 30 minutes. Anybody here learn to walk in 30 minutes? Anybody learn to drive in 30 minutes? Some of you think you have spouses like that, though? What am I pointing out here?
Takes practice time.
Everything you have done in your life. There is nothing you have done in your life that you have learned to mastery in 30 minutes. I think you're going to be amazed at how well you can feel this after just an hour's instruction. But my challenge today is not to teach this to you. It's actually very easy to teach. My challenge is to motivate you when you go out this door to remember to do this at least once a day for the next month. If you do, you will be amazed at the change in your life because you'll literally have a way to trigger that calmness reflex and clear angers, worries, and hurts like that. The trick is making it automatic so you remember to do it. Okay, and we're going to work on that today. Okay? Yes?
Do you do it with your eyes open all the time?
The question is, do you do it with your eyes open? You can learn to do this with your eyes open. For today's, especially the warm-up, I recommend eyes closed so you cut out one more layer of distraction. See, the reason we do the partner warm-up is so that you're not having to think of so many things at once. In this first warm-up, the partner is helping you get your attention above eye level and triggering to go in. And then we're going to add on to it as we go. So you're doing more and more on your own. Okay? All right. Okay. Now, one more instruction for people sitting in the chair. If you're biting down on your jaw, it tends to make it harder for you to experience. And if you're biting down or scrunching your forehead, that's a good sign that you're trying too hard. Okay? So make sure your jaw is relaxed. And again, remember, this is just a warm-up to help you locate this area. Okay, stroking people, hands in place. 1 or 2 fingers on the tip of the nose. And stay with me all together. Come up, touch, go in, caress. Bring your hand back, ready for stroke again. Come up, touch, go in, caress. A little bit faster. Come up, touch, go in, caress. Come up, touch, go in, caress. Come up, touch, go in, caress. One more time. Up, touch, go in, caress. All right, now we're going to try a second version where you're not actually touching them. Instead, you're going to sweep your hand through their biomagnetic field and just pulse energy at that area. So it'll look like this. Come up, pulse, go in, caress. And we'll do that 4 or 5 times. Ready?
Do we have eyes
Closed. Ready? Come up, pulse, go in, caress. Just bring your hand up through their biomagnetic field, up, and pulse at that forehead area. Come up, pulse, go in, caress. Don't actually touch them. Up, pulse, go in, caress. One more. Up, pulse, go in, caress. And one extra for fun. Up, pulse, go in, caress. Okay. Now, see if they'll let you have a chance in the chair. Switch places. You can keep running. Now again, a reminder, people sitting in the chair, don't bite down, don't try too hard. Folks who are stroking, make sure you stay with me, because if your touch is off from my rhythm, that's distracting for the person. And also remember, don't touch them anywhere else. And that's not a joke. If you're a couple, you can do that optional variation later. But what I mean is sometimes people put a hand on the person's shoulder while they're stroking, and that touch on the shoulder is very distracting. Okay? When we do the energy pulsing, what you do is you pulse at that upper forehead area and then bring your hand away. You don't run your hand over because you're liable to hit their hair, and that distracts them. Okay? See which one you like best. And remember, we're just warming up. Okay, hands in place, light as you can on the tip of the nose, and come up, touch, go in, caress. Up, touch, go in, caress. Up, touch, go in, caress. A little bit lighter. Up, touch, go in, caress. And one last time. Up, touch, go in, caress. All right, now just with the energy version, through the biomagnetic field. Come up, pulse, go in, caress. Up, pulse, go in, caress. Up, pulse, go in, caress. One last. Up, pulse, and an extra for fun. Up, pulse, go in, caress. Okay, let's have a seat. Okay. Now, you want to see something interesting? How many of you preferred the version, raise your hand if you preferred the version where you had the actual touch. Hold them high. Look around the room. How many people preferred the version without, just the energy assisted? What are you noticing? It's almost half and half, isn't it? Some groups are more one than another, but it's if you add up all the groups I've done this with, it's almost half and half. And this actually illustrates an amazing principle about the brain and learning. One of the 5 elements of a brain-compatible learning environment that they're actually teaching public education teachers to help kids learn and retain better. By the way, the reason kids don't learn well in gang neighborhoods has nothing to do with their IQ. When the limbic brain is not soothed, when you're not calm, when you're in survival stress, you're sucked out of higher cortex. Kids in troubled neighborhoods aren't learning because they're not operating in higher cortex if they're afraid for their safety. How many times have you gone through something spiritual or personal in your life and you said, I thought I'd learned that before? That's a soul long-term memory problem, didn't go from short-term soul memory to long-term soul memory. And that's because you were probably acting more out of fear and distress. No matter how bad a circumstance is, if you can do this joy touch technique and calm yourself, you'll be able to address the problem more from higher cortex or beyond. See, one thing we know about the limbic brain is it literally has the power to suck you into your animal evolutionary past. And it walls you off from higher cortex. If it walls you off from higher cortex, what do you think it also walls you off from? Soul, guides, God, universe. That's why this is such a breakthrough. It literally, when you can trigger the joy center, you can escape the pull of the animal evolutionary past and live more as an enlightened consciousness. Whether that's a mental term for you or a spiritual term, it gives you the physiological method for living the philosophy you believe in. Now, our next technique, we're going to go on without a partner. Partner warm-up is just helping you to get started. Whichever version you preferred, the touch or the pulse, that's the one I want you to use. But you can use your own hand this time. So I'm going to say pulse. What I'll say is come up, pulse. And on that pulse, let me just give the directions first. On that pulse, I would pulse energy at that upper forehead area, mid-forehead or above. Okay? If you preferred the version where you had the light touch, when I say pulse, just bring your hand in and touch yourself lightly. Don't try and do this by stroking up the nose. The tension you create in the arm distracts you. It's easier to just bring your arm up and touch lightly at that point, or pulse. I'm going to lead 4 or 5 on my rhythm, and then we're going to do another 4 or 5 on your rhythm. I'll say, go ahead and do 4 or 5 more on your own rhythm. And that's where people start to feel it a little stronger. So when I'm leading it on my rhythm, if you're not feeling it as strong as you like, still keep exploring. Try a little bit higher. 90% of the people I talk to who aren't getting it as strongly as I'd like to, they're too low. They say, well, I'm going mid-forehead, and they show me a spot that's about a ½ inch above their eyebrows. It's more like 1 inch to 1.5 inches above the eyebrows. Okay? Or try a little bit right, little left. One of my senior instructors wasn't getting the joy touch as well as they'd liked after a while. And they actually did something very different. They just left an incredibly left brain world with a lot of stresses here in the film industry. And so what they did was they came up from the right brain side and caressed more on that side. And it seemed to help them get the effect stronger. Okay? I'm going to go through different variations like that with you before we finish. But for right now, you're not getting it as strong as you'd like. Try a little bit right, little left, a little higher. Okay? And what are you going for? Just that feel. A little bit of a lightness. All right? Whichever hand you're most comfortable using. And come up, pulse, go in, caress. 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 One last. Up, pulse, go in, caress. Now do 4 or 5 more on your own rhythm. And just get it to feel the way you want it to feel. Okay. Now, here's one of these homework exercises I want to give you for practicing once you leave here. If you take an ice cube or a cold soda can and you slightly chill your fingertips, and with chilled fingertips touch that area, you'll find you get an interesting triggering. Okay? It doesn't work to take the ice cube and put it there. Okay? It's too much different in temperature than the skin, so all your attention just goes to the skin level. Okay? For centuries, when people are distressed, where have we put the cold compress? On the forehead. It's got absolutely nothing to do with blood pressure or cooling. If you wanted to lower blood pressure or cool them, you would put it under the throat. So you got the carotid arteries and the jugular. Okay? Isn't that an interesting? For those of you who have a metaphysical background, I'm always fascinated how things can have a scientific and a spiritual explanation. The septum pellucidum is a documented site for this mood elevation effect. But spiritually, it is also at the exact intersection of two key chakras, the crown chakra and the brow chakra. If you connected them, they would intersect right at that point. Interesting coincidence. Okay? We're not there yet. It doesn't work. Even if you can trigger this effect the way we just did it, it doesn't work to be walking around saying, "Oh, hi, boss. Yeah, I'm glad to be here at work," and tapping yourself on the forehead. Okay. Would you like to see how a type A anal retentive person does the technique? Would you like to see how a type A anal retentive person does the technique?
Yes.
They smack themselves in the head. Ay, ay, ay. There's also the ethnic variation, oh, you know. And I do believe kids do this instinctively, but they take a different approach. They go up through the nostrils. You know. My wife's a teacher, so I'm exposed to a lot of this. By the way, have you heard, this is a teacher joke, what's the difference between boogers and broccoli? Kids won't eat broccoli. This is what teachers experience all day. Anyway, we want to go now to being able to do it just with your mind. Once you know that spot, you don't have to use your hand. Okay? So let's try this. Think of someone or something during the next week that you're going to have to deal with that you know you could use this technique for. Okay? Some person or some situation where you know this technique would be helpful to do either before, during, or after dealing with it. Okay? Now, hold that situation in mind. What do I mean by hold that situation in mind? Some of you are more visual, and you might literally see it, picture it. Some of you are more auditory, and for you holding it in mind means hearing the dialogue, all the obnoxious things they're going to say. Some of you are more feeling-based. You might not see anything, hear anything, but you can feel how that's going to be typed. Okay? And some of you are more intuitional. You just know. Okay? But as you hold it in mind, everybody doing that? Holding it in mind? Feel it starting to create the uncomfortableness, and don't put up with it. Take your awareness up and just go in and caress at that level. See how it lightens your perspective on that situation. As you're picturing it, just take your attention up and caress that joy center, that septum pellucidum area. Do you feel how that lightens your perspective? You still have to deal with the situation, but it can get you off to the side where you're more objective. Okay? The key thing is to learn and find triggers that remind you to use the technique. I have two boys who I literally call research material for advanced versions of this technique. Okay? I mean, I took a cross-country van trip with them, and at Toledo, Ohio, they got bored out of their mind, and they stood up and said, "Let's see who can fart the loudest at Dad," okay, in the van. That's when I repacked the van for the rest of the trip. I put all the coolers and the sleeping bags between me and them like a wall and put them at the back of the van. But I tend to be kind of a screamer and a pointer. You kids! You ever heard that old saying, watch where you point, because three are pointing back at you? Yeah. So when I start to do that pointing, I see those three fingers, and it reminds me to go in and do the caress. Okay? And I literally can diffuse the anger and mellow out and say, I love you, I have to discipline what you did. You see? It gives me a way to do that out of my job, my responsibility as their parent, not out of just reactive anger. Okay? Yes?
When you focus on this very spot, do you have some spot in mind which is right in the middle of your head, or rather in...
What I usually do is I first make sure my tension's up high enough, and then I go in with like a caress. I literally go in, sure. For me, a lot of times I've been using that analogy of like strumming those cells, those fibers at the front of that septum pellucidum area. Or a lot of times I like that wave analogy. Just literally pulsing those waves to trigger that mood elevation effect.
Does it help at first to use your hand doing that?
It can help you at first to use your hand. I want you to know that once you're comfortably getting it, move to the next level of just doing it with your mind. And there's nothing written in stone that says you have to caress that area from the front. It's just the easiest to teach in large group situations like this. Very often when I'm really angry or really upset, I find it's better to come up from behind. And I literally picture like an energy wave, almost in like a Kundalini meditation, coming up and caressing that from back to front, like an energy flow that way. We're going to end this program by showing you how to do it from the top, by literally caressing from those soul dimensions down, so you know all kinds of different approaches. Okay? Yes, sir?
I experimented many times with the following, and it seems to me it may be connected with what you are teaching.
Okay.
I would come home after an exasperating day.
Yes.
I would put one of my favorite records, classical, semi-classical, or melodies. I would feel within 2 or 3 minutes a mood elevation absolutely tremendous.
So for the people listening on tape, what he's saying, he would come home after stressful days and put on a favorite piece of music, in your case, classical or semi-classical. Music is something that does trigger mood elevation. In fact, there's one oldies station in another city that their motto is, put on the oldies and feel better fast. Okay? Music does have that power. The nice thing about this technique is when you can't get to music, you can combine the technique with your own inner hearing of that song. For some people, that's a way to add to it. I've had some people even say they picture the music coming at them and the notes flowing through and strumming their harp in that area. Okay?
Two things. Is it better to err on the side of being a little bit too high?
It's always better to err on the side of being too high than too low.
Okay. And
Okay.
also, is it necessary to tie this in with breath?
Question is it necessary to tie it in with breath? I don't teach you that because for many beginners it's too much to handle all at once. It's not essential. I do have some people who like to do this caress as they breathe in, and they literally picture a double breath, air in the mouth and energy in that forehead area. For other people who've been doing it for a long time, that's just still too distracting. So they just like to focus on caressing and let the breathing do whatever it wants. Choices. You pick the version that's best for you. Okay? Now, this is only half of the approach, though. Teaching you how to caress this area is not enough. Because if you have something that is a major issue, it tends to what I call reflash. That's the word they use in fires for watch out for that fire reflashing. And that's because the limbic brain is literally set up to be like a broken record car alarm. If you do the joy touch, you can soothe that area, but if it's a very severe anger, worry, hurt, or fear, it can just come back in a few seconds. So we have to be able to get at the root of what's causing the limbic brain to trigger. And that's what I'm going to cover with you now. Okay? One of the limitations about an hour-and-a-half workshop is I can't go through all 50 pages of solutions for different worries, hurts, angers, or fears that are in the second chapter of the book that comes with the book and tape. But I do have time to tell you how to approach all of them. Okay? The reason people haven't been able to find the answer to why we keep cycling... By the way, did you ever notice how when you really get stuck in a juicy worry, hurt, anger, how it not only keeps going, but it gets worse? It literally spirals down, doesn't it? Okay? And by the way, this next section, it can get heavy talking about worries, hurts, angers. That's why I teach you the joy touch first. If anything we're talking about in this next 15 minutes, before I teach you this technique for tapping soul dimensions, feels heavy or uncomfortable, what are you going to do? Do a couple of caresses at that level, okay? But getting back to what we're talking about, did you notice how angers and worries tend to literally spiral downward? how we tend to stay down. See, the nice thing about having a national organization with 200 instructors coast to coast, some of which I think of as more spiritual than myself, I used to think it was just me that did that. Well, you know, you're left brain, Taurus, vision audient, anal retentive. The more I, you know, touch base with more people and all my instructors, I found everybody does this. And I started seeing a pattern and saying, what's the reason? We don't do anything without a reason. So I started looking for the why. The reason people haven't found the answer to that downward spiral is they've been looking the wrong place. Or more exactly, they've been looking in the wrong time. The answer to why we spiral downward with our hurts and our worries is actually in our past. Now, we've all had different pasts, different childhoods. You may have had a great childhood, you may have had a dysfunctional childhood. Really doesn't matter. We've all been exposed to what I'm going to describe next. And in fact, in psychology studies, we've found that the most compulsive behavior actually comes from non-ideal circumstances, from our uncertainties. The classic experiment they did was 3 animals. One pressed the lever once, got a pellet of food. The second had to press the lever 100 times to get a pellet of food. 100 presses to get 1 pellet of food. The third animal had a random event computer on its level. One time it would get a pellet, one time 7, one time 1,000. Which animal do you think wouldn't leave the lever? The third, the uncertainty. So, you know, you could have had a disastrous, uncertain childhood, and you probably would have gotten this effect I'm going to describe even more so. But back when you have a child, an infant, and that infant is really worried or really hurting, and they cry out, what usually happens? Someone comes and what? Picks them up and comforts them. They usually also stick a bottle in their mouth. Does that give you an idea why ice cream is such a big... People may not do alcohol, nicotine, drugs, but they do Haagen-Dazs like crazy. Ice cream is just another milk derivative. Right there, when you got picked up and comforted, that's where your programming to associate limbic brain soothing with an external comforting person got started. See, programming, Pavlov's programming, ring the bell, feed the dog, ring the bell, feed the dog. Eventually, the dog, even if it's full, salivates uncontrollably at the ringing of the bell. When you were little and that person picked you up and comforted you, that's where you started learning, the way out of this limbic brain distress is if someone else will soothe me. What happens to the infant if they cry out and no one comes? They then cry, how? Louder. When we're spiraling down, when the infant cries and no one comes, they cry louder. So, when we're spiraling down in that worry, hurt, anger, we're literally what? We're crying out louder for someone to come comfort us. And it's a faulty system for 3 reasons. Number 1, there might not be anybody there. You can cry till the cows come home, nobody's coming. That's strike 1. Strike 2, there's somebody there, but they don't give a damn. Okay? So you lose big on that. Strike 2. Even worse, most tragic, strike 3, is there's somebody there and they care, but they don't know how to comfort. And men, listen up. We're the worst at this. Ladies, I'm not going to let you off the hook. I'll tell you how you do it in a moment, but men classically have a solve it reflex. When people we care about are in distress, we tend to dive in with solutions. Well, here's what you do to fix that. Why didn't you tell them they were an asshole? Next time they do that, just quit. All right? I even had one lady who said that her husband routinely told her there was no problem that couldn't be solved in 5 minutes with duct tape. There was another lady in the audience who said, yeah, over his mouth. No, but see, this is tragic because men care about their partners, but because of the solve it reflex, they dive in with solutions. When you are in limbic distress, do you want solutions? No. What you want is comforting. You see? Now, ladies, just so we don't pick on the men, don't let you off the hook, we all do this. Have you ever noticed when we're working on a problem for ourselves, we tend to dive right into solutions? Well, what am I supposed to do? How do I fix that? When you are in limbic distress, you shouldn't go after what's the answer to solve it. What do you need first before you can think clearly about the solution? Comforting. Okay? If you can remember 2 simple questions, you can clear any worry, hurt, anger, or fear for the rest of your life. See? The limbic brain is so powerful that you have to have something simple. You may have read volumes about hurts and betrayals and rejections. You may have read all the books. When you're in limbic distress, they're worthless. You don't remember them. You understand? Because you're pulled down into limbic brain. You have to get back up to higher cortex. You have to punch out to higher cortex. And if you can remember 2 simple questions, you have a mechanism for doing that. And those 2 questions are, now, let me do something for just a moment. Think of a limbic stress that you have. Think of because I want to give you something to practice on. Think of some anger or worry or hurt that has been nagging at you. Okay, everybody got one? Here are the 2 questions. What would comfort me in this situation? What's the essence of what would soothe me? Okay? The banana split isn't the essence. It's just the scenery. The essence is the treat. Okay? What would comfort me in this situation? And number 2, how can I give it to myself? For example, I had one instructor who worked in a law firm. Okay? Do we have any lawyers in the audience? Are you okay with one lawyer joke? Not all lawyers are like this, but this was the type of law firm she worked in, okay? Do you hear what lawyers and sperm have in common? They all have 1 chance in a million of becoming human. That was the type of law firm she worked in, okay? Not your type of law firm, I know. She literally never felt appreciated. She did all the data processing for the whole firm. It made her mad and felt hurt. It also reminded her of how her father wouldn't allow her to be an artist. He said, can't make a living as an artist, I'm not going to let you go to art school. So this was actually a limbic stress that had inner child bruises to it also. Okay? Those 2 questions, what would comfort me in this situation and how can I give it to myself? That's what we call the comforting connection process, the comforting connection technique. And for her, her comforting connection was to feel valued. That's what she needed to be soothed. She really didn't need them to value her. That was almost an impossibility. And she wasn't going to make her dead dad value her art. What she needed was to feel valued. How can I give it to myself? She took one of her paintings that most represented her artisticness to herself, and she stuck it right above her computer terminal. And whenever she felt that angry and hurt, she just looked up and valued herself. How many of you have heard of this guy, Leo Buscaglia, who believes in hugs? Do you think that's important, hugging? Sure. Okay, let me see. How many people within the last week have hugged somebody they care about? Okay, keep your hand up. If in the last day or 2 you've hugged somebody you care about, keep your hand up. Good, good. Now, keep your hand up if in the last day you've hugged yourself. Oh, you don't care about yourself. You know, they've now proven that how you feel about yourself directly controls the level and veracity, the vitality level of the killer T cell in the bloodstream. The killer T cell, by the way, is not only your defense against flu and colds, it's also, and AIDS, it's your defense against cancer. People don't realize the body makes cancer cells all the time. It's like a factory that spits out a lemon every billionth cell. The T cells are what get those things before they become tumors. The reason cancer rates are up across the board is not just because we're exposed to more carcinogens, okay? And by the way, a University of Manitoba study, they gave prescription level dosages of common things, painkillers, antihistamines, Prozac, to animals with tumors, and in every case the tumor growth rate increased. Point of the study was there is no safe drug. All drugs have side effects. Do natural things wherever you can. The reason cancer rates are up aren't just because of the drugs and the carcinogens we're exposed to. It's because the stress levels have crashed people's immune system so much. Doing the joy touch and giving yourself a put-up, a something you love yourself for, may literally be your most powerful preventative medicine there is. Many hurts deal with not feeling loved. How can I comfort? What's the essence of what would comfort me? To feel loved. How can I give that to myself? Remember to literally cherish yourself once a day. Every time I have been most hurt in my life, I can literally look and say, my God, I have gone a month or months without remembering to compliment myself. I've been doing, oh, you didn't do that at that workshop, you forgot this, all the put-downs. Okay? Many worries revolve around feeling helpless. During this last 6 months, I was forced to literally, I got new research material. Just after I discovered this technique, we had huge floods in Arizona, and I didn't know if I was going to be cut off for civilization. Bridges on either side of mine washed away, but I felt great because I knew this technique. It's like, no problem. 3 years later, we had floods again. You know what the research material was, the difference? I wasn't with my family. I wasn't on the same side of the water. The flood happened while I was out lecturing in another city. I felt incredibly helpless, worried. I finally said, what would comfort me? To not feel helpless. Well, you dummy, you've been teaching energy channeling for 20 years. Send energy. On the physical side, I made phone calls that helped. You understand? What will comfort most worries is anything that helps you feel less helpless. Okay? That's where, because of the limitations of time, I can't go further. The 100-page book that comes with the tape literally has every different approach for every type of worry, hurt, anger, or fear. Specific types of comforting connections and techniques. Okay? But what I want to close with is showing you a way to climb the ladder to also an even higher level. Let me ask you a question here. How many of you believe that you have a soul? Let me see your hands. Good. I think that believing you have a soul is actually one of the reasons that people are more limited. Yeah, I don't believe that any of you have a soul. I believe you are a soul. You have a body. And you might say, oh, that's just trick language. No, that's another way you've been programmed. You've been programmed to believe you have a soul. Where is it? See, if you have a soul, then you must be something else. And the something else you make yourself be is the limitations of the body. When you think of yourself as a soul, your birthright is the unlimited potentials of energy. And even science is explaining some of this and agreeing with it. The latest in physics called superstrengths. Subatomic physicists are always trying to find the smallest piece that makes up everything, makes up the smallest, from which the whole universe can be built, and they feel they found it, and they call that smallest piece a string. And they picked a simple name like a string because the strings tie together all of the energy matter in the universe. Okay? If you twist the strings one way, they become a proton. Twist them another way, and they become an electron. Twist them still another way, and they become a photon of light. Twist them still a different way, and they become a graviton, the mysterious particle or force that makes gravity function. Now, that's the boring physics lecture part. The fascinating human potentials part is that all of your top physicists, Caltech, MIT, Oxford, Soviet Union, they all agree that the strings exist in a minimum of 10 dimensions. And what they say is 3 of space, 1, 2, 3, height, length, width, 1 of time, and then they say very rapidly, and 6 other dimensions we don't have the technology to measure yet. Okay? So for the first time, your top scientists are admitting that there are dimensions beyond that we can't measure technologically yet. But see, you can still experience those dimensions because you exist in them. If the strings exist in 10 dimensions, then so does this board I'm writing on, and so do you. Since superstrings, soul is no longer necessarily a religious term to me. I think I can talk to a complete atheist and say, you as a soul, and I mean you and your full bubble of consciousness. The 6 other dimensions we don't have the technology to measure yet. And by the way, if you're not a real student of brain science, you may not realize that one of the biggest outstanding mysteries in brain science is how the wiring of the brain creates consciousness. Consciousness is defined as how you recognize you as you, a unique entity, and how you create new thought. Most people are not aware that according to pure orthodox brain science, you never have an original created thought of your own. The byline on pure orthodox brain science is that every thought you have is just a reaction to sensory stimulus. There's actually a story in my book, You Are Psychic, called The Day Brain Science Wasn't Enough. Because I had a one-on-one tutorial with one of the senior brain science professors, and I said, I know that when we stimulate this cell in the motor strip, my leg works or moves. And if I move that leg, we see that cell fire. And everybody said, now I understand. I don't understand. What makes that cell fire when I choose to move? And he said, well, some other cell in the blah, blah, blah region. And I said, well, what makes that cell fire? And we traced cell pathways, and I said, could we bottom line this? I'd like to graduate this year. And he said, well, it's got to be some cell in your retina or cochlea. And I said, wait a minute. Am I just reactions to sensory stimulus? I said, don't you feel like you initiate thought? And he said, well, not when I'm driving on the freeways. I said, no, come on. Bottom line, don't you feel like you initiate? Yes, I do. I said, how do we explain that? That's what I just spent mega thousands of dollars here wanting to learn. He said, we don't have a clue. Consciousness may be another one of those areas that lapses into those 6 other dimensions. Okay? And that's what I'm going to show you now, is a technique for climbing the ladder to those deeper dimensions. It is absurd to try and describe 3-dimensionally a multidimensional energy field. Okay? But when people say, where is the soul? Most of that energy, that's those 6 other dimensions, is actually above the head area. Think of an upside-down iceberg. You know how most of an iceberg's below the water and only a little's above? Turn it upside down, and you have a pretty good visual analogy of the relationship to soul to body. Most of that soul energy actually exists outside the head area. Small portion comes down into the head area, helps us run the machine. You have to do that to operate in a 3-dimensional realm. By the way, this is why most people see an aura for the first time above the head. If an aura were a straight biomagnetic effect, it should be strongest at about ear level, a little above ear level where the corpus callosum is, brainstem comes out, or at the solar plexus where all the ganglia are. 9 out of 10 people who see an aura for the first time see it above the head. They're actually seeing the soul energy field. And that'll also give you a hint why many paintings of saints and religious figures always put the halo there. Even if people don't see auras, they sense a radiance. This technique that we call learning the soul shift is a way to take your focus back up through that ladder of the body into that bubble. Now, basically it's very simple. I just have you focus on your lower legs and we shift your focus upward till you get to the head area. When you get to the head area, you just make one more focus shift. Most people feel that is like stepping into a vaster space. If you feel pressure in the forehead area, it's usually because you're trying to twist your eyeballs back and take them out there with you. Okay? You want to do it as more just sensing that space, focusing without forcing. Okay? And once you get up there, just see how far you can stretch. See if you can sense into the corners of the room or even beyond the room. But what we're going to do is we're actually going to do two techniques. Once I get you up there, we're also going to have you then just funnel energy from that soul level into the body. And where do you think we're going to go with it? Right through that septum pellucidum area. You literally can let universal energy, God's love, whatever your truth is, flow in, and by triggering the septum pellucidum from above, give yourself an even deeper unwind.
How do you stop it from getting to the other part, though?
Well, I found that when you flow it in here, it literally floods the body with almost like an endorphin wash. Okay? And if you're worried, you can have it just to go there and then go out and caress the rest of your aura. Okay? All right. Don't try, don't force. Take a deep breath, relax, blow it out, and close your eyes. As you close your eyes, just start to become more aware of your own body than your environment around you. Just kind of sense your own bubble of space. And then focus your awareness more on your lower legs. Do your feet, your ankles, your calves. And just start to shift your focus upward. Do your knees, your thighs. All of your awareness shifting up through your body. Hips, waist. Keep riding that elevator of awareness. All of your awareness shifting up into your chest, shoulders. Keep riding that elevator. All of your awareness shifting into the head area, getting ready to make that final shift. Up, out, and let the boundaries come off. Make that shift. Just release and explore. See how far you can stretch. See if you can sense into the corners of the room or even beyond the room. Notice how you can sense in all directions. How that soul part of you feels timeless. How that soul part of you can literally be a funnel to let universal energy flow into you. Soul energy, God's love, universal oneness. Just hold that funnel in mind and let that energy come to you. Literally like a finger or a caress coming down. All of that universal energy flowing into you and caressing that septum pellucidum area from above, giving you pulses of universal energy, renewing, vitalizing, energizing every cell, every fiber in your body, being able to trigger that area from above. Give yourself one last caress and start to get ready to shift your focus back into the head area. All of your awareness just above the head, and make that shift. Bring your awareness back into the head area. Become aware of your eyes, your ears. Note the difference in feel, the constriction as compared to that free-floating energy state. Start to pick up your arms, your legs, Tap your toes in the ground or wiggle a finger. And when you feel comfortable, just gently open your eyes. How'd that feel? You feel good? Again, you did the whole thing, start to finish, in under 3 minutes. Now, believe me, doing presentations like this is always frustrating for me because we have literally 20 years worth of material, and trying to squeeze it into 5 minutes is, into 90 minutes is difficult. The reason I always like to include this soul shift technique, even if I have to rush through it more. And by the way, in the You Are Psychic book, there is a whole chapter on the soul and soul skills, as well as a whole chapter on mind-body healing skills. I always like to do this technique because it's literally a crossroads technique. When you can get up to that soul crossroads, there's all kinds of things you can do. You can soul travel, you can multi-location aware, you can heal the body on all kinds of different levels, not as mysticism and phenomena, as skills that you can learn practically. Our 10-lesson course, whether it's on cassette tape or in the textbook version, literally gives people 80 different skills step by step. So eventually you can get to the point where you can do this soul shift, eyes open and active. You can be interacting with someone, eyes open, be soul shifted, scanning their soul, receiving from the universe, all as practical skills. When you know the joy touch technique and you find you're not able to meditate or soul shift as well as you'd like to, the key is to do that technique first because it literally unlatches the suck of the limbic brain. The other reason I like to show this soul shift is frequently if we're really enmeshed in a problem, we're so drawn in by the limbic brain, if you do the touch from above, it's almost like you create a connection to your soulness. You see? The vast majority of what interferes with our happiness is the scenery of life. It's like going to Universal Studios here. You know how they're all false fronts? If you believe that you are a soul, then you have to not let the scenery win. Use the scenery for creating enlightenment, for creating learning. The nice thing about knowing the joy touch and the soul shift and techniques like that is you can literally say, all of the things that are getting me down are going to serve me as research material for my own enlightenment. The minute you do that, you're out of helpless. What most triggers the limbic brain? Feeling helpless. You see? If you can use those things as research material, you're no longer helpless, you're out of limbic brain. By the way, have you all heard of all the inner child work that's done? Yeah. Do you know that there are some psychiatrists that have called inner child work the most detrimental thing to the American psyche since the Vietnam War? Most of those people are, anal retentive, left brain, never had a feeling in their whole life. But they're right about one thing. There are two models of inner child work. The one that is vastly more popular is the victim model. In the victim model, you are a survivor of abuse. In the other model, the challenge model, you are now what you are, not in spite of what you've been through, but because of it. And you can literally say, bravo for the courage you had as a soul to face that research material. Why do you think the victim model is more popular by almost 100 to 1? If you're a victim, you can still be crying out for someone to come comfort you. You see? I actually had an experience recently where I was incredibly pressured, and I developed the joy touch technique, and I consciously knew I was choosing not to use it for 3 days. It was amazing to me. I was like outside watching, why are you not using this? And you know what it was? I was so pressured, I desperately wanted my wife to come say, it's okay, there. And when I finally realized, and how many times have you noticed that when you have your crisis, your life partner is going through one too, and can't be there for you sometimes? When I finally realized that, I said, okay, I'm going to do there for me, and I'm going to remember to use the technique. Okay? Thank you for allowing me to share with you today. Try different variations. In the 100-page book that comes with the tape, there are also specific adaptations that are written out for how to use this for cutting alcohol abuse, for how to relieve nicotine addiction. By the way, they have now proven that nicotine releases endorphins in the brain. And that is one of the reasons it is so compelling, is if we've been getting our endorphin pulse that way, that's hard to give up. This gives you a way to use this technique to help you wean yourself. For PMS symptoms, there's things described in there, and for overeating